Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Hi, welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast with Hema Lomax and me, Lisa Fine. We are sponsored by Corporate Compliance Insights and are part of the Compliance Podcast Network, where you can listen to so many great people talking about so many important issues of the day. My guest today is Danielle, who is the Vice President, Risk, Compliance, and Ethics at Bloom Energy. That's just a small part of our discussion today. Over the past few months, I, like many others, have been following her Compliance with Courage posts, where she candidly shares her thoughts after being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, including the challenges she's facing and the lessons that she's learning as a result of this diagnosis while also working. I'm so honored that you're willing to take the time to speak with us, and thank you for being an inspiration and for being so open with all of us in what you're going through. So we'll spend a little time if you want to talk first about your professional background.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I'm happy to be here and to chat with your audience. So my professional background, I have worked in compliance and ethics, really the vast majority of my career, over 20 years now. Prior to joining Bloom Energy, I worked more in financial services. And my role at Bloom Energy is a bit broader. I also handle our enterprise risk management program, as well as our legal operations on top of our global compliance and ethics program. So I kind of wear 3 primary hats in my current role, but really my entire career has been focused on compliance and ethics at all sorts of different companies and in different industries.
All right. So now let's talk a little bit about you and what you've been writing about. One of the things is you wrote that your diagnosis was a turning point and it was a big before-after moment. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then we'll go into some of the decisions you faced and how you're approaching it.
Absolutely. So I think whenever you're diagnosed with a terminal illness or a chronic condition, or if there's any other type of big kind of life moments that you have, there's a lot of chance to reflect on decisions you've made in the past, kind of what the future might look like for yourself. And I definitely had that kind of before and after moment. If you were to talk to me about my career 6-7 months ago, my outlook was entirely different than it is today, where I wanted it to go, where I thought it was headed. What I'd really been focusing on so much over the past 20 or so years, not to date myself too much, and then trying to kind of think, how does that change? What does that look like now? Does it look different? And there was a lot of unknowns when that diagnosis first happened and really required, once I came to terms with it, or at least partially came to terms with it, a pause to really think about, have I made the right decisions up until this point? Would I have done things differently, whether it be professionally or personally? And how would that kind of shape decisions I would make going forward? And I think that it kind of happened quite quickly. And part of it was just everything seemed to happen quite quickly. But to have that type of pause, I think, was really important in that before and after.
And then how and when did you start communicating about your diagnosis with colleagues, family, managers, others? How did you make that decision and how did you go through it?
It was interesting. I didn't get sick overnight. It was kind of a slow progression. My first symptom was really a dry cough. And even though I tend to work remotely, I also would go into our headquarters on a pretty frequent basis. So folks knew I had a dry cough. That makes everybody nervous, especially post-COVID. So my manager and my coworkers knew that I had this weird, very sporadic dry cough. So they knew that there was something going on, and I had gone to urgent cares and primary cares and doctors over the course of a couple months. And my manager would often say, hey, did you figure out what's going on yet? Have you checked in? Any update? How are you feeling? And it took quite a while once you start going down that path of testing to try and see what's going on. And I felt perfectly fine otherwise, other than this dry cough that would occasionally throw out my back, so to speak. And it wasn't until probably 2 or 3 months in, I had my first x-ray, which showed that there was something more serious wrong. Before they did the CT scan, which really showed there's cancer and there's a problem. And I chose not to disclose it outside of my closest family members until I had more facts, because I really didn't know what was going on in any great detail. And I wanted to know, what exactly is my diagnosis? What would my treatment options look like? Am I going to be able to work? Am I going to need to go out on a leave of absence? Because I knew those were the questions I was going to get, and I wanted to be prepared for that. And I didn't want a lot of people at work to be thinking those things without knowing more information. So I purposely withheld the information for a few weeks while I continued with my testing, talking to my doctors, really trying to figure out what was going on. And really, as soon as I learned that this was not a new cancer, it was a recurrence of breast cancer, which I had 9 years prior, and that I wasn't really eligible for chemotherapy or for surgery, and that there would be different treatment options, and that best case scenario, they would treat it more like a chronic illness. And I learned that I would likely be able to continue working. And to me, that was the deciding factor to say, okay, now it's time to have that conversation with my manager. And I will say that even though my manager knew I had this weird cough, a cancer diagnosis was completely unexpected. No one thought that's what would be coming. So caught completely off guard. And the people I communicated it to first, really, it was my manager, was the very first person at work that I told. And I also told my HR business partner, because I felt like those were the two most critical folks. And it was really good timing because there was additional benefits available through my employer that I hadn't been aware of, that they immediately rolled me in to have more support through my cancer treatment, which has honestly been life-changing, and I can talk more about that later. But I still think waiting until I had more information, more facts, and was able to answer questions and really say, I'm planning to work through this. That work may not look the same as it has in the past, but my plan and my desire is to really to continue to work. And I felt really confident in that decision at that point in time. So that's kind of when it started. And as far as colleagues, I waited a little bit longer to tell colleagues. Unfortunately, I ended up going into the hospital for a couple of weeks shortly after I was re-diagnosed. And that forced my arm a little to tell folks why I wasn't as available. I did work while I was in the hospital, which resulted in some interesting emails, but that really forced me to let people know that I was unavailable for reasons that they were not familiar with. But it was a really good decision because they rallied, to be honest, and the support from the team was amazing.
It is great to hear. And then when did you decide you would start sharing on LinkedIn? And I'd love to know about the moment right before you hit post on your first post. What inspired you to do this?
Interesting. So I don't know how the analytics work, but as soon as I was diagnosed, all of my social media feeds turned to cancer blogs, cancer influencers, cancer treatments, cancer medications. I don't know exactly how that works. LinkedIn was the one exception. I've historically used it to post business or work-related things, whether I'm sharing information about my employer, but there really wasn't anything personal coming in my feed. And I found that interesting. And I thought this might be a unique way to share my story as opposed to TikTok or Instagram, where I would just be one of a million different cancer bloggers. I felt like LinkedIn doesn't really have a lot of folks, at least that I've seen out there, talking about how they're working either with a chronic illness, a disability, or something like cancer. So I thought it would be a little bit more of a unique way for me to share my story. And there was a lot of things I had to take into consideration. And hopefully I won't regret any of it in hindsight. But before I hit that first post, as you asked, the one thing that ran through my mind was, this might make me unemployable in the future.
Wow.
Because now everyone's going to know. And the first thing that a prospective employer down the road, even if it's 5 or 10 years from now, they're going to look at your LinkedIn profile. They're going to look at things you've posted. And if I decide to go down this journey of talking about something so personal, would anybody ever want to hire me again? And I really had to get comfortable with the risk associated with that. You'll know that if you see my posts, I did turn off my comments. That was actually a recommendation from a coach of mine who said, basically, you may have the best of intentions and people may be so nice, but there's always people who aren't. And for your mental health, perhaps turn off those comments. Maybe they're not as important. Just share your message without having to get that kind of written feedback from folks. So that is one of the reasons I did turn those off. I don't know that it's necessary to have them off or not, but I've kept them off at least for now. But there's definitely risks associated with sharing something so personal in what's really more of a business-related place.
As you were saying that about turning off comments, one thing I also think might be really good about that is that people will start an aside conversation in the comments that could have absolutely nothing to do with you. And next thing, you have this whole disagreement about something, and it has nothing to do with what you're trying to share. And if people want to, I think they know how to reach out to you. So I think that probably put you in good stead. So one of the things that you've talked about in those posts and when we spoke is what is showing up. So what does showing up look like for you? And has that changed, both being a leader and a patient and a compliance professional?
I think it has changed quite a bit. I think anyone who knows me would definitely describe me as a workaholic. And I think I'm still a workaholic, but I think it looks different today than it did previously. An average 50, 60-hour work week, the vast majority of my career was normal. I'm very used to having worked all sorts of different hours, managing global programs, working through weekends for special projects. And early in my career, someone had said, as a woman who wants to excel, you really should never say no. And for whatever reason, that kind of piece of advice had stuck with me for the better part. And I always said yes, no matter what it was, taking on special projects, people reporting to me, taking on new roles and responsibilities. I always said yes. And I think that's one of the things that's changed is that now I have pause and I really try to think things through. And I don't necessarily feel as though I have to say yes to everything. I don't know that will negatively impact my career at all, but I do feel like I have more power to say no, and that sometimes saying no is healthy, both professionally and personally. And it's interesting when you've worked your entire career and always said yes to all of a sudden start saying no, and to have noticed that there's really not a negative impact. You could have said no a long time ago. That's a little bit enlightening as well. But trying to figure out what my new work-life balance looks like when it's never been a priority for me before has been an interesting lesson. And I've always had different size teams at different companies, and I've always tried to preach that my work-life balance is going to be different from someone else's. And just because maybe mine doesn't look right to others doesn't mean I don't respect the work-life balance that other people choose. Sometimes people feel pressure to work as much as their boss does or something along those lines. And that's always been very hard for me to manage and to coach people on. But even now, what does that look like? And having to fit in multiple doctor's appointments a week, whether it's actual medical appointments or wellness-related appointments. I go walking with an oncology group. It's really important to me. How do I fit that in with all of my demanding work schedule? And I think that it's really just been a shift. I think my schedule looks a little bit different than it used to. I will turn down meetings. I will ask other people to attend meetings in my place. I will reschedule them around health and wellness related appointments. My day might start a little earlier for work and go a little bit later because there's some disruptions throughout it. And I'm okay turning on my computer on a Saturday and Sunday to catch up on things because I prioritized non-work related activities during the week. I still want to get my work done. I'm very much still a workaholic. It's still really important to me, but the balance is different. And it's interesting with all of my doctor's appointments and all of the different folks I see, they're always surprised that I'm still working. And I find that surprising. And I don't know if it's age related, if more folks are at a retirement age when they're diagnosed, or they're going through different treatments, which really don't allow them to continue working, something along those lines, but they're always so surprised. And they don't always take that into consideration. Sometimes they just schedule appointments without even asking. They have no care for what my calendar might look like, but it's really required me to pay very close attention to my schedule and to make sure I'm allowing enough time for those appointments. And then for my work meetings as well, and for the travel in between. Not to say that I haven't done a number of meetings in the hospital parking lot or the doctor's office cafeteria, because that can work as well. But I think really the flexibility that I don't think I prioritized as much pre-diagnosis. I was a little bit more rigid. I felt like I had to not only work the 9 to 5, but more the 7 to 7 with special projects on weekends. But now I feel like I just have to be more flexible, and not just for myself, but whether it's for my team, my coworkers, my manager, whoever it happens to be, just recognizing that we don't always know what's going on in everyone's lives. And it really is more important that the work gets done than how and when, from my perspective. When is maybe not the right way. That obviously some things have to be done by a certain time, but generally speaking, that flexibility with everyone, I think, is really important. I don't want it just for myself, but to recognize that other people need that flexibility too. You don't have to have a diagnosis to need to get your car fixed or to pick somebody up or whatever it happens to be in your personal life. And that really, it generally doesn't have to impact your work negatively to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, I think that's a really good sort of lesson for everybody too. And it's tough to be getting it in the way in the time that you are. But you've also talked a lot about having really good support. And you mentioned it earlier with certain benefits or other things that your employer immediately stepped up with. Can you talk about that a little bit too?
Sure. Yeah. In addition to just the general support you would hope to get from your manager, your company, your coworkers, as far as that flexibility that I just talked a little bit about, I hadn't been aware that we had access to a company called Private Health Management. I had no idea what they did. And as soon as I mentioned to my HR business partner that I was diagnosed with cancer, she was immediately like, I'm going to enroll you in this. And I don't know if she did it while we were talking, but it was almost instantaneous. And I got a call from this company. I had no idea what they did. And they essentially put a team together to help me through. And it consists of a registered nurse, a case coordinator, and a PhD scientist. And they have been with me since day one. And again, it's a benefit I didn't even know existed, which is probably a good thing at the time. But they have helped coordinate second opinions. They have helped to pester doctor's offices when I couldn't get an appointment when I needed it, or to reschedule something to meet my schedule, or if I needed a refill and I just couldn't get a response timely. They have taken on a lot of that kind of administrative burden that comes with managing your health. They also talk to me in a way that's different from doctors, which resonates really from a work perspective as well. My doctor uses big words. They mention tests using acronyms. Every medication has 3 different names, and I get confused as to which is which. This company will provide me with a PowerPoint. We all can relate to a PowerPoint. They will send me a PowerPoint that explains a test result in words I understand. They will use pictures and graphics. They'll hop on a Zoom call to help me understand something in a way that resonates with me. And again, it's a benefit I didn't know existed. And I've told my employer, I've told them that I don't know if I would have been able to continue working without their support. Not only have they probably helped to literally save my life by getting second opinions, by helping me choose the correct oncologist. I'm in a study program that I would not have gotten into without them. All of those things aside, they've made it easier for me to continue working. And from a work perspective, oftentimes we approach compliance and ethics from a legal perspective. We use acronyms. We use terms that other people don't understand. We reference laws and regulations using their formal names. And I think now being on the other side of that from a medical perspective, it's made me rethink a little bit how I talk, how I write, how I draft things. Can I be more like private health management? Can I meet people where they are? Can I talk to them in the language that they're accustomed to hearing, and that will resonate with them a little bit more? Because it really has been life-changing to have that resource to say, here's what that really means in a way that I'll understand it. And can I develop a program that does the same thing? It's been an interesting life lesson.
Yeah, and that is actually one of the things I want to talk about. You also speak a lot about how this has reframed your perspective on compliance. You've mentioned it now in terms of acronyms, rules, speaking to them, but how it's made your thoughts evolve on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many parallels that I don't think I ever realized. When you're first diagnosed with cancer, at least almost everyone I've ever talked to, they actually put you through like cancer education. Mm-hmm. And it makes me think of when you hire somebody and you put them through compliance training in their first 30 days. You kind of bombard them with all of this information. They're not necessarily using it yet, but you're going to give it to them because that's what you do. That's what you've always done, and that's what the process entails. And it was the same with my cancer. Within my first couple of weeks, I had to go to a 2-hour class on cancer treatment and what it means. I can't even remember any of that today. I couldn't begin to tell you what I quote unquote learned or didn't learn, or what it was telling me. And it wasn't specific to me personally. It was generic videos and information. So it wasn't actually about my cancer and my treatment and my medications. And I think that's really similar to how I have historically dealt with training for new hires from a compliance perspective. They get training that is either expected or required because of some regulatory requirement, and they have to take it within a certain period of time. It doesn't really matter if they need it or want it, or if they're going to remember it, or if it has anything to do with their particular role. Mm-hmm. And I've always, it seems like forever, been the one pushing versus receiving. So when you're on the other side of that, you're like, wow, that was really unhelpful. And that was 2 hours out of my life I am never going to get back. And now I can't remember that at all. So when I'm looking at rolling out my annual code of conduct training or my annual anti-bribery and corruption course or reviewing what I ask new hires to take. It has for sure given me pause. Does this matter? Are they going to remember anything? Is this the right time to give them training? Is it even have anything to do with their job? If I have somebody in manufacturing and I'm providing them bribery and corruption training, the likelihood of them being a party to that is so low. Does it even make sense? But it's been interesting to cause me to reflect on my program and those types of things and to think about when would it have made more sense for me to have that type of training? And could it have been more customized for me personally versus just very generic? And I think there's been parts throughout my career where centralizing your compliance and ethics program has made sense. Doing the same thing for everyone, especially when you have a small team and you don't have the capacity to really customize it, has been your only option. But given the choice, I think today I would choose customization, point in time. Can I get to people when they need it? Can I do it in a way that speaks their language and resonates with them? I'm a big believer that I shouldn't necessarily have to talk about all the laws and regulations that people have to follow if I can help them understand what it means to do the right thing or when to ask questions. The laws themselves fall away because they won't ever come into practice. But it's definitely been very interesting to see it through different lenses now.
Yeah. And one of the things you said is talking about rewriting the rule book with compassion. And I just think that's a really cool quote. So how did that come to your mind and what does it mean?
I don't know that I would have ever described myself as a compassionate leader in the past. I think I've been a strong leader. I think that I've done a really good job in a lot of different roles, but I don't know that I would have ever used the word compassionate. And I think that if I look back on my career, I was probably more hesitant to build relationships with people because of my role in compliance and ethics. I felt like I often needed to keep people at an arm's length. Because if I was going to be pushing requirements down or performing testing and monitoring activities or working closely with internal audit on things, that I needed to keep a bit of separation and a bit of distance. And I just don't know that I feel the same way about that anymore. I think that I can do both. I think that I can get to know people on a personal level. I think that I can be more compassionate about their experience, whether it be their life experience or their work experience or how they got where they are and what's important to them. And I think that it can make me a better leader to be able to manage and kind of do both things, that it's okay to be compassionate. It's okay to have those relationships. It's okay to care and to really also still hold people accountable. You can do both. But I think that as I envision the future compliance and ethics program that I want to be involved in, that I want to develop, that I want to bring to the forefront of Bloom Energy, it is very much that one that does include kind of compassion, that really takes into consideration what people are doing, where they've come from, has some more flexibility built into the program itself, but can still accomplish the same things, maybe in a more meaningful way than I have historically with a much more kind of methodical black and white view of things.
It might be a challenge sometimes with that compassion. How are you finding yourself balancing sometimes the need for policies that, even the most compassionate people are still like, seriously, really? And so how are you balancing practicality and this compassion?
Yeah, I think in my mind, at least, and sometimes I talk about it this way too, I kind of view compliance and ethics programs in two different buckets. There are certain parts of the program that are either required or expected. And it almost doesn't even matter if they're effective. You still have to have them. And it could be, again, because of it being an expectation. I'll use the code of conduct as an example. Do I think a written code of conduct is particularly effective? Generally, I don't. Would I ever recommend not having one? Of course not. Do people expect us to have one? Yes. Do I want to have the best one possible for the organization? Absolutely. But I don't necessarily think it's effective. So it kind of falls into that bucket of a part of my program that someone either expects or requires us to have, and I'm going to have it. People aren't necessarily going to like it. They may not use it. They're for sure not going to read all 25 pages of it. And then the other part of my program is one where I really want to think about what is more effective. Where can I be a bit more creative? So it's not that I I don't think of like a check the box program in a negative way by any means.
Right.
I'm going to have all those things in place. I want them to be excellent, best in class. I want them to be tools that are available. But then I also want to be a little bit more thoughtful about what's actually going to work.
Right.
Does it make more sense for me to join a meeting that is happening on a periodic basis with a particular department to talk to people, to ask them how things are going, to provide a 5-minute update on something new in the world of compliance and ethics, or to give them a quick reminder? If I know that we're considering as a business entering a new market or a new country that has a particularly high risk, can I figure out who those people are that are going to be interacting the most in that space and pick up the phone and call them, or schedule a Zoom meeting, as opposed to sending them a written email or enrolling them in a webinar or an online training?
Right.
Is that going to be more meaningful, more impactful? Is it going to resonate more with them? Can I have that conversation? So I very much view things in kind of those two different buckets, knowing that I can't get away from the expected parts of the program.
Okay.
But if I can get those done in a good way, perhaps it frees me up a little bit to think about, can I try something new? Is there something different I can do to reach people? Even if it doesn't work, that's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's a different part of my program. I've already got my checks and balances covered on the other side. But I do think that it makes me want to be more creative and more effective and more meaningful.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think as you talk about the code, I think a lot about when somebody will periodically say, it's in the code. Didn't they see this? Maybe, but remember that I've also read about 1,000 other things since then and are doing their jobs. And that's a perfect example of that. And one of the last thing I wanted to ask you about is the difference. You're a leader. You've been talking about how hard you've worked for a long time and asking and answering questions in the career, and then being a patient versus that. You mentioned, again, the wording, the acronyms, the other things. Can you talk about how those have commingled with you and what one side is learning from the other?
Gosh, I like to think I'm a much better leader when it comes to compliance and ethics than I am as a patient. I do not advocate well for myself, which is interesting because I would normally think that would be something I'm really good at. And it doesn't come naturally to me. I can advocate for others, whether they've been direct reports of mine or peers. I always feel very passionately and very strongly, and I feel like I can help.
Yeah.
But for myself, I have found so many times an hour after leaving a doctor's appointment, I'm like, oh, I should have asked that, or I should have done that, or I should have spoken up about this. And I find it much more challenging to really lead my own healthcare and where I want to go in it. And I like to think that I'm getting better at it. I joke because I see physical therapy, and my physical therapists are amazing. And I went to them recently and I said, listen, all this physical therapy is great. It is all textbook physical therapy. You're getting me to be more mobile. It's great. What I want to be able to do is get off of an exam table all by myself and protest if I don't like what's going on. And they were like, done. That is all we're going to work towards. And I was like, I just want to be able to complain. But if I can't get off the table, I don't feel like I can complain. And they were like, done. That's going to be our sole focus. And it was like the first time where I was like very clear about, this is what will help me, as opposed to just following everyone's orders and doing what they say and getting enough protein, whatever it happens to be. It was the first time that I was like, listen, I don't always like the way these tests go, and I feel like I can't protest. How do we get it so I can protest and advocate for myself? And it was a little bit of a turning point for me to say, wait a minute, maybe I can be more direct and specific about where I want my care to go, and maybe pulling in a little bit of how I lead from a business perspective into kind of my personal life, which generally it's two different sides of me, but can I let those merge a little bit more? And can I be a little bit more of a stronger advocate for myself and pull in some of those skills that I've used them for all these years? I need to just pull them over now, I think, a bit more.
Yeah. You've learned a lot of those the hard way over the years. You might as well pull them in.
Yes.
Before we close, is there anything else you would want to really share about right now?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd share is that I'm just really thankful both for my compliance and ethics community who has helped rally and has been really appreciative and responsive to my posts, just supportive of my journey, as well as my employer really stepping up and making sure that I have what I need, whether that's to work long hours or shorter days, has really been very helpful as I continue to figure out how best to navigate this journey that I hope is going to be a long one, but has really been supportive.
I think we, speaking on behalf of the compliance community, me and others, are really grateful that you did decide to hit post that day and share it with all of us, because it is a journey that we want all to support you in it and everyone else. And it means a lot that you're willing to share with the rest of us, because it can't be easy sometimes with the other things going on. But thank you for that. And thank you for being such a great part of the Great Women in Compliance community and the compliance and ethics community as a whole. And on that, everybody has a great day. And thank you again, Danielle.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.